We're on the phone today with guitarist Paul Jackson Jr. He's worked with everybody from Michael Jackson to Madonna, Elton John, Aretha Franklin, and he's in a band now called Jazz Funk Soul. Hey, Paul, how's it going today?
Hey, Dustin. I'm quite good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yay, absolutely.
Well, first of all, can you tell us a bit about your group, Jazz Funk Soul? How did you guys wind up getting together?
Well, that's kind of an interesting story. Jazz Funk Soul was an outgrowth of live shows being done by Jeff Lorber, Everett Hart, and Chuck Loeb. And so they were doing a few live shows together, and so they decided, hey, why don't we do a record together? So they did 2 records together. Well, at the same time, Chuck Loeb was also in Foreplay. So what happened was, if Foreplay had a concert or a gig or a tour, then I would go out with Jeff and Everett and sub for Chuck, because I'd known Chuck and we'd play together and stuff, and plus I've known Jeff and Everett for years. And so that continued, and then unfortunately Chuck got sick. He had cancer, and so sometimes he would feel like playing and sometimes he didn't. So when he didn't feel like playing, so the guys would work, I would go out and sub with him, sub for him. And then unfortunately, subsequently he passed away. And so the guys, kind of took a break and reevaluated and said, well, we think Chuck would want us to continue. Would you like to join the band? And I said, well, yeah, I'd like to be with you guys. So we did the record Life and Times. And then this year we released, or I should say last year, late last year, we released a second CD with me on it called Forecast. And that's kind of the story in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I know Forecast has been doing really well on the charts. Can you tell the listeners a bit about Forecast in case maybe they haven't checked it out yet?
Well, the cool thing about the three of us, not only having known each other and worked together for years, is there's a really cool creative synergy. Jeff, we call him the workaholic, because if you give Jeff, 5 days, he'll come up with 10 new songs. And Everett and I are a little bit more introspective, but working together, we balance each other out. One guy's, the other guy's zags, and when one guy makes an I, the other guy will dot it, and so it works out really well to for the three of us working together creatively to come up with music that's not only groove oriented, but also has a good amount of serious harmonic content and places on which to solo. So it's a really good place to be, because not only do you have the funk and the rhythm, but you have a means to where you can improvise and have creative expression. So it's really good group and a really great project.
Definitely. And I know you guys are on tour right now. How's that been going for you so far? I know you've been playing a lot of years. It's got to be great to be back out on the road and kind of back to normal here as far as live music goes.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we're going to be up in the Bay Area this coming weekend at Yoshi's and doing several festivals this year, Burks and Seabreeze and a bunch of other stuff. So it just feels really good to be back out playing live. And there's nothing like playing live in terms of, creative expression. I mean, the studio is a lot of fun, but, live, you're in front of people, and live, you only have one chance to get it right. So, you have to bring your A game. So it's really exciting to be back on the road playing.
Well, you mentioned the studio, and I know you've recorded a lot of music over the years. I'm amazed at the list of people you've worked with as a session player. Can you talk a little bit about that, how you got into that line of work?
Well, it was just really the blessings of the Lord and a lot of help from a lot of people, mainly 3 people. Patrice Rushen, who you well know, Ray Parker Jr., and Lee Ritenour, actually, 4 people. And then a guy by the name of Frank Wilson, who when I started really getting into it, was one of the number 1 record producers in the world. He wrote "I'm Gonna Make You Love Me" and "Stone Love" and just a bunch of hits. And what happened was Ray Parker and Lee were pursuing solo careers primarily, so they got out of doing studio work. And so they would literally call the producers and say, hey, I'm not doing anymore. Call this guy Paul Jackson Jr. So that was one avenue. And then I actually had been working in Patrice's band and continue to work with her. Funny story is I am working with her even to this day, where she is the department chair of the contemporary music department at the University of Southern California, and I am one of her professors. So it's kind of cool. We've come full circle. And so because of those four individuals, I got a chance to work with a lot of great people early on, people like Barry White and the Jazz Crusaders and different folks. And then I went on to, play with people like Cher, Whitney Houston, a lot of recording with Michael Jackson. And the list goes on, Barbara Streisand, Madonna, just a lot of different people I was really fortunate to work with.
Yeah, definitely. The list really goes on and on. I imagine it must be hard for you to even keep it all straight at this point. You got to keep that stuff written down someplace.
Yeah, well, I keep a running log, which is kind of cool. I tell folks it's interesting. I had the fortune to play on, the good fortune to play on the number one record in the world 30 years apart. The first one being Michael Jackson's Thriller album, and the second one being Random Access Memory by Daft Punk. So that's kind of a cool thing to do, play the number one record in the world 30 years apart. So I keep a running log.
Yeah, that is awesome. Can you talk a bit about, being a session guitarist and how that works? Are you bringing ideas in and working with the artists, or is it sometimes maybe just sheet music you're following? Or?
Well, it's both. Sometimes people will write out their ideas. Sometimes they don't have a concept and they call you and say, hey, can you make it feel better? Can you make it sound better? Can you fill in the gaps? And so being a studio musician, there's a thing that you get on your report card when you're in preschool. You come home and they say plays well with others. So that's a big part of it, is you have to play well with others, cooperate, learn how to make music feel good really fast, and add something. Sometimes it's written, sometimes it's your own ideas. Many times it's a combination of both. So that's kind of what it's like to be a studio musician, in terms of, always being ready, always being prepared, always having the right instruments, and a good sound and a good attitude. So all those come into play in terms of being a studio musician. And
of course, the versatility as well with all these different artists you've played with. And you mentioned him earlier, playing with Michael Jackson. I know you started on some of the Jackson's albums, but then eventually you're playing on Thriller and Bad. I mean, that's on a whole nother level.
Yeah, Thriller and Bad and Dangerous and did a lot of records with him, and also the brothers, Destiny, Victory, just a lot of stuff with all of them. And it's just a lot of fun. I mean, in retrospect, I was, just a young guy having fun playing the guitar with a lot of great people, and Michael Jackson being one of them.
So when you're in the studio recording Thriller, or you're playing on Beat It, are you imagining that you're working on what is eventually going to be the best-selling album of all time? I mean, that's pretty crazy, considering it was probably just another day at work at the time.
Well, the cool thing about Thriller was Off the Wall had already been tremendously successful. I think at that time when we were doing Thriller, Off the Wall had already sold like 5, 6, 7 million copies. So you had a good idea that Thriller was going to be really successful. You knew it was going to be a hit record. Nobody knew how big of a hit record it was going to be. But, when you're in the studio, you have a good idea. Said, well, okay, if Off the Wall sold, 7 million records, this one's probably going to do at least that, if not more. And, nobody knew it would be, by this time, I think it's close to 100 million records.
Well, you mentioned some of the people before, Madonna and Elton John, Aretha, Kenny Rogers. I mean, is it possible for you to choose a favorite, or, some of your favorites that you've worked with over the years, or maybe somebody you're most proud to have worked with?
I'm really proud to have worked with all of them. I mean, probably Luther Vandross would be one. Obviously did a lot of records with Luther. Obviously Whitney, Michael, Kenny Rogers, like I said, Cher, Barbara Streisand. Working with Barbara Streisand, it's interesting because my mom especially was a Barbara Streisand fan, and so I come home saying, "Hey, I just worked with Barbara Streisand." That's kind of cool. Or someone like Celine Dion, or just a lot of different folks. A lot of like I said, the Daft Punk record was pretty amazing, and just a lot of great things. And then some of the jazz artists like Stan Getz and Stanley Clarke and George Duke and George Benson and different folks I've been able to work with, play with Herbie Hancock several times. So, it'd be hard to pick a favorite. Like I said, I'm just really, enjoying the blessings and living the dream. It would be impossible to pick a favorite.
Well, Paul, I got to ask you, one of my favorite albums that you worked on, and one I'm sure you don't get asked about a lot, but the album Mr. T's Commandments with Mr. T. Do you have any stories about working on that one?
I don't. Wow. How did you remember that? I didn't even remember that one. I don't remember it. If I remember, was he in the studio? Yeah, he was in the studio. Very nice man. Everyone has a public persona, and but just a very nice person. And at the time, because he was very popular, doing a record was a good extension, get it out to the fans, and especially the younger fans. So that's once again a project where you kind of go, okay, this project is a little atypical of what you normally do, but it's going to be successful. And the other thing is, it doesn't matter what it is, you always bring your A game. You always, the customer's always right, and you always do your best. My mom used to have a saying. She'd always tell me, okay, when I leave town or get ready to go do a gig or a session, she'd say, okay, play pretty. So I always show up to play pretty.
Yeah, that was an interesting time, especially in the 80s and into the 90s. You had a lot of albums put out by people that normally you wouldn't expect to see. I don't know if that's still happening nowadays, but back then for sure, I'm sure you probably saw a lot of weird names pop up on the call sheet.
Well, I'll tell you, a fun one was the Do the Bartman.
Oh, sure.
I think it was a collaboration between Brian Loren and Michael Jackson. And so that was kind of a fun project, obviously because of the success of the Simpsons. We did a single called Do the Bartman, and that was pretty amazing. It sounded great, did well on radio, and you have the guy, the voice of Bart Simpson. So it was a really, really cool project. But like you said, it was atypical, but it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Paul, I know that you are kind of working on a little of everything these days in addition to jazz, funk, soul. Is there anything else maybe that's coming up down the road we should be looking out for?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I just released an EP called Stompin' Willie Presents More Stories Part 1. And so that's doing well. And so I am releasing Stompin' Willie Presents More Stories Part 2 in a couple of months. So look out for that.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm always amazed at musicians like you who are able to work on essentially hundreds of different recordings, and you're still able to find new and fresh ideas and keep it all straight. I think it's incredible, the work that you've done.
Thank you very much. You try to keep your ears open and listen and learn and always practice. And, there's always, the cool thing about music is you'll never learn it all. There's always something to learn. And if you keep that in mind, you can always stay fresh because there are always new ideas, for you personally.
Excellent. Again, Paul, it's amazing the career you've had, and you're a busy guy, but I appreciate you taking some time out with me today, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you having me on.
Hopefully I'll see you sometime down the road here, and Jazz, Funk, Soul, that Forecast album is great. I'm looking forward to more from you guys.
Much appreciated. Thank you, Dustin. Lord bless you. Have a good day.
And again, that was guitarist Paul Jackson Jr., and his group Jazz, Funk, Soul is on the road now. The latest album, Forecast, is available as well.